Join Paranormal M, where eerie stories are just the beginning. Subscribe and enable notifications to stay updated on our spooky tales. And I'm just going to ask nicely. If you could leave a like on the video, it would help a whole lot. Get ready for a chilling adventure. I saw a ghost. The pub/bar I lived in was haunted. It must have been around 2004 and 2006. I was a young boy, roughly around 2 to 3 years old. My family lived in a pub, or a bar, I don't know. It was most definitely haunted. If you know how to change a beer barrel in a pub, you'll know that they can't be done by themselves. Well, it did all the pipes and they would disconnect at night. The floorboards would creak at night. The windows and doors would open when they were locked. The till, which is the cash register, it would open by itself. The lights would come on, and one night I remember being in my own room. I remember it like yesterday. I was trying to sleep and I felt like something was watching me. That eerie feeling. Then 3-year-old me saw this ghost. From what I remember of the ghost, because of some reason the night I remember seeing the ghost, but I can't picture its features. Anyway, it looked like a young boy in old clothes. This was what I told my mother. I remember it telling me to stay in bed, but I was like, fuck that. I ran like a bitch out of there, crying my eyes into my mom and my dad's room. As I got older, they would tell me they knew it was haunted, apparently. And it was a young Victorian boy. They didn't really believe it until I said what I saw. My mom and dad are quite resilient. Not fussed by the paranormal, and things went on as normal. That was because where we lived, that's how we would generate income. I don't know how long after this, but the electrics tripped. It was like 04 or 06 maybe. We didn't even have fuses then. You didn't have fuses. A fire broke out during the night, and the firefighter said to my mother that I was about 2 minutes away from dying. So, take it as you will. My personal belief is that paranormal activity does exist. Me and my partner buy creepy dolls from charity and thrift shops all the time. They've moved, and during the night all we hear is chairs screeching across the floors downstairs. We don't even have chairs downstairs, only a sofa. That's my story. K-E-K. Ominous. Another paranormal experience. Okay. Today I wanted to share a paranormal experience that I've lived for about a month. Today I call this apartment the living hell. So let's get back to 2017. That's where I just moved to this small but cozy apartment with my family at the end of August. My first day and night in this place was actually good. The only one time I was feeling safe here. So, let's move on to the second day. Specifically, the second night. It was midnight and I was still unpacking my stuff, and it was exactly 12:05 a.m. That's when I smelled a fire smell. My window was open, so I thought somebody was smoking. I closed it and I kept smelling it for maybe 5 minutes. So, 12:10 a.m., keep the hour in your head, by the way. I went to sleep, and an hour later I got woken up at 2 a.m. That's because of a noise in my room near my bed. The first night I thought it was neighbors. That was until I heard the footsteps. You can tell when the footsteps are from above you or in your room. And those were definitely next to me. I was feeling insecure and I kept hearing noises. Every single night, until we left, I'd hear noises. Always from 2 a.m. to 3 or 4 a.m. But I also smelled the fire every single day. Remember the time? 12:05 every night up to 12:10 a.m. Never earlier, never later. Just 12:05, 12:10. It was at the end of my bed. I wasn't the only one in my apartment that was like living with something, you could say. Every night, no matter who went up to use the bathroom, they could also smell something. Starting in the kitchen and going through the corridor and stop exactly at my door. My whole family could smell like this rotten meat. It would sometimes smell in the day, but mostly in the middle of the night. The smell makes us feel nauseous. We tried to call somebody to see if there was an explanation, but no one could give us a reason to that smell. I started to feel sick because I couldn't sleep at night. I ended up asking my friend to come sleep at my place. She's also a paranormal believer, and she was scared shitless that night. I first asked her because I thought nothing would happen if she was here, but I was wrong. We were watching a funny movie when we started hearing the noises. At least I knew I wasn't going crazy. We tried to think about something else, but we soon had a big jump scare. It was 2:15 a.m. We heard a massive noise in my room. I turned on the light very quickly to see my heavy jewelry box on the floor. There was no reason for her to fall like this. Well, she was very heavy. Your jewelry box is female. My friend was trembling in fear. We decided to put headphones and watch another movie. She fell asleep at 4 a.m. and I talked with my friend Lucas up till 7 a.m. because I was too scared. We moved maybe a week later. When I moved into my actual house, she's literally next to this apartment, so every time I go out and I walk for the apartment, I see it. I made some researches. I typed my last address, and I find an article about this place, and I was in shock. A couple of years before we moved into this place, there was a fire, and a young woman aged 23 unfortunately passed away in this apartment. The kitchen was caught on fire. She couldn't escape. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The fire smell in my room and the nauseous smell in the kitchen. I always say since if somebody paid me $1 million to sleep one more night in this apartment, I'd say no. Fib. Since we left, 2 families have moved into this place, and they left after a couple of months. But I bet they weren't offered $1 million. The Hat Man. So, we go way back to when I was maybe 7 or 15 years old, spending the night at my grandma and grandpa's house. Many encounters at this house. We were out in the sticks in Minnesota. Quick little side note about my grandma. Everyone in the family always says that she's had quote-unquote stuff following her all of her life. But anyways, I wake up in the middle of the night, no clue what time. I remember looking out the window for some reason, seeing a tall figure out by the barn. They had a big street light that lit up the whole driveway and front area of the house, and this figure was just perfectly illuminated by the light. He was very tall, had a long trench coat. He had a top hat-looking hat, and it wasn't really possible to see his face. It also didn't seem like he had one, not feet. He was just standing over there not doing anything, and I remember a sense of calm rush over me. It was while I was looking at him. I turned my head for a split second because I thought I'd heard somebody out of the bed and looked back and he was gone. A year or so ago, I was visiting my grandpa in his new home. My grandpa died a year prior from cancer. Paranormal stories were brought up. My cousin, her boyfriend, and one of my friends were also there. I then mentioned the Hat Man at my grandma and grandpa's old house, that my cousin and grandpa both remembered seeing him very often at the old house. I was very baffled, honestly. Later on, I randomly decided to look him up and found out a lot of people that have seen the exact same thing I had, often while having issues at home, which was very common for me and my cousin. saw a coworker who passed. I'm a night shift RN. We recently had a coworker pass tragically, but I'm newer to the hospital and I only knew of him because he transported patients. He was always in and out of the dead. I didn't even really know his name. Sunday evening, somebody mentioned his passing, and when I asked for a description, I knew exactly who it was. He had a very distinct look, walk, and air about him. I had a fleeting thought of how sad that news was, but I didn't know him, so I got busy and never thought of it again. The next morning, when my shift was done, I took the employee elevator to the ground floor and to the area mostly just for staff. As I exited the elevator to head right down the hall, I saw the guy who I thought had died to my left just a few feet away. I glanced at him and I thought, oh good, he's the one everybody was describing. Must be somebody else. Then I headed the other direction and I went home. That night I went back to work and people were again discussing him, and I finally asked if anybody had a picture of him. One of my coworkers pulled up his Facebook and my stomach sank. It was, in fact, the guy I saw in the hall. 100%, not a single doubt. So I blurted out, I saw him this morning when I got off the elevator. My coworker said, yeah, that sounds about right for this place. He didn't seem surprised at all. But I'm shook. I can't reconcile this, and I know I saw without a doubt. But I also can't believe I saw a ghost. My hospital is pretty old and known for excellent employee retention, so I asked several of the long-time employees. I was seeing if there's anybody else who works in this department that looks like him. We wear specific colors for each department, like blue for RNs, gray for transport and radiology, black for RT, etc. They all said that there's nobody else who looks like this man. So anyway, I'm baffled. Why me? Why him? And why can't I accept the possibility that I did see him? I'm fascinated by this type of stuff, but I've certainly never encountered anything paranormal or remotely this bizarre. Can't talk about it at work because it sounds insane. I guess I just needed to get it off my chest. My partner thought he was going mad until I saw it too. Evil and dark. I've experienced shadow figures for a number of years. My partner is a skeptic. Well, was. Within the past 2 weeks, we've both had a number of terrifying experiences. So I'm gonna get back to the story as best that I can. The first time it appeared, it was to my partner and my dog. Paul had taken the dog over the field around 1 a.m. As he entered the field, he saw a figure to his right. He thought it was a local teen smoking. He didn't pay any attention, really. As he got along the tree line and bent down to get the dog's mess up, he heard trees rustling and looked up. The same figure was in the bushes. It was black and featureless. A prominent figure, but in black and grayish. It looked like it could charge through you. That was his description. He was terrified, and both he and the dog ran. The thing charged through the undergrowth, keeping level with Paul. Branches were breaking, and it sounded inhuman. The dog dragged Paul, and they ran until they got home. He is a skeptic, but he can't explain it. We went down in the day, and there's no clear path through the undergrowth. No broken trees or broken branches. A few days after I was on the same field with the dog, I heard rustling in the bushes, and I felt really oppressed and negative suddenly. It was weird. I looked toward the rustling, I saw the leaves moving, and I went to see if it was a mouse or something. There's nothing there. But above me in the trees was a shadow creature. I told it to go home, and maybe it was lost. I turned and walked away. We both walked the dog the following night and felt evil energy. We knew that we were being watched. We both knew exactly where we were being watched from, and both felt it at the same time. there's nothing visible there. The last incident happened at 4 a.m. this morning. I was walking down the road I live on. A black figure moving fast caught my attention. I thought it was a local addict. Definitely a person. I came level with the alleyway and the figure had entered. A black humanoid mass that radiated evil was staring at me from what should have been its face. But it had no features. It was directly under the lamppost which was working. It felt malevolent. The best description I've heard of it is it's a bull of a thing. The feeling it gives off is like way worse than seeing it. I'm not usually fazed by shadow people, but this thing is dark, and it has me worried. If anybody has any insight, I'd greatly appreciate it. Phantom sibling or subconscious. Last year I lived in a somewhat crummy apartment with my sister and my 2 other roommates. However, at the time this story took place, it was just me, my sister, and our friend Tori. This particular afternoon I was home alone and I went to lay down on my bed. So I walked into my room and directly to the right is my bed, pressed up against the wall. I closed my door, and I never really leave it open, but when I have roommates for privacy, especially since this room was directly back to the living room and the kitchen. But anyways, I shut my door, I lay down on my bed facing the wall, I grab a small throw blanket, and I close my eyes when suddenly, not long after I closed my eyes, I get the strongest feeling that my sister had walked into my room and was just standing there looking at me. I thought maybe she was trying to be quiet since my back was to her and didn't really want to wake me in case I was asleep. Which my sister's crept into my room like this before, usually to steal something from my bathroom. But I always hear her open the door and usually get annoyed. I ask what the hell she wants, so I can just tell her where it is without her digging around. I'm kind of a very light sleeper. I remember even hearing faint noises like when somebody walks really slowly on carpet, so as not to disturb a sleeping someone, which really made me believe that it was just my sister, because any time that she's walked into a room late at night and sees that I'm in bed, she usually stands there for a second or two, probably to let her eyes adjust to the dark and check if I'm actually asleep. I do suck at falling asleep, so sometimes I'll sit up and ask what's up. Well, it sounded just like that. But then, my heart sank when I quickly realized it was mid-afternoon. My room was very bright. The door never opened. And the thought, I don't think that's my sister, popped into my mind. I quickly froze and made myself count down from 3, to which I would turn around super fast to see what the heck was in my room with me. Well, I counted down, turned around, and found that nothing was behind me. Just empty space. Now, here's where it gets weird. I figured I just heard settling noises from the house or something like that. Maybe I just got spooked from the drafty little apartment. But I couldn't help but feel like, it was a little bit odd. I continue on with my week unbothered until towards the end of the week. My sister comes up to me randomly and says, "Did you come into my room?" To which I replied, "No, why?" She says, "I don't know, I could have sworn you walked into my room, but when I looked I didn't see anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I proceeded to tell her the exact same thing happened to me a few days before. I could have sworn it was her based on the sounds I was hearing. The best way to describe it's like how you can tell when your sister's walking, like, versus your mom, based on the specific noise that the person makes. Like each person has their own noises. Well, hopefully that makes sense. It does. We've never had any other weird feelings like that since, but I don't know what the heck caused that. It's almost like we were so used to having one another around that we create a phantom sister that mimics the other, so we convince ourselves the other is there even when they're not. Much like when a loved one passes and your brain can convince you that they're still there based on creaks and shadows. Anyways, that's my story. Has anybody else experienced something like this, or any other sort of explanation. I'm a health major, so I usually try to use science and psychology to explain things. Although sometimes the mind is scarier than ghosts. So I kind of wish I would just see a little ghostly friend and realizing my brain's glitched out. I second that part about psychology. Well, the brain. How Granddad's spirit saved us. My granddad passed away in 2012. God bless him. I was 8 years old at the time, and the year after, my family and I went abroad to the place where we camped for a month each summer. Each time that we'd been, we'd always said that we should follow the trail into the woods, but we never really did. But that year, as soon as we arrived, we decided to go. My dad stayed behind with my youngest sister to set up the caravan. So myself, my mom, and my little sister went to follow the trail. We walked and walked and walked. The sun was scorching hot, and the paths got more and more confusing with no signs. We had no food, drink, or phone signal. Must have been out on the trail for at least 3 hours in 40 degrees, centigrade heat. Celsius. My mom was getting increasingly worried for me and my sister. We'd reached the point of dehydration and desperation that we began praying and begging out loud for someone, something, or anyone to send us a sign. I remember sitting in the long grass begging my granddad to help. He always knew what to do in these sort of situations. Once my little sister felt like she was able to keep walking, we tried again to find our way back. Suddenly my mom shouted out loud, "Water! We have water!" And right there in the middle of the path was a large bottle of sealed water. We drank the entire bottle in minutes and somehow were able to find our way back to the main forest by simply following our guts. My dad, youngest sister, and a few other campers that my dad had found just helped us where we were in the forest. We walked back to our camp, set up, and sat together, telling my dad about what had just happened. As my parents spoke, I saw the most beautiful sunset I've seen to this day. My heart knows to this day that my granddad was with us, giving us the strength to keep walking and mentally keep going. My dad's never fully believed us, but me, Mom, and my sisters know what we saw and how he was there. Ghost footsteps. When I was a child and later on a teenager, I had some strange experiences at my grandmother's house. By the way, I wasn't the only one. I'm not going to get into the history of the house or how I believe it came to have this strange energy. Suffice it to say, it was indeed haunted. The house was a 2-story wooden house, built in the 1920s by my great-grandfather. I had never met him. My grandma became a widow early on in her life, lived with her 2 sisters who never married. I loved visiting as I was the youngest of all the grandkids, and we lived overseas. Any time that we visited, it was a big deal. They only saw us a couple of times per year. I got a lot of attention from grandma and great aunties. A lot of cheek pinching, hugs, and kisses. Basically tons of love. The first experience happened to me in maybe the late 70s. Must have been 8 or 9, something like that of age. Everybody had retired to bed, and I was the only one left still watching the black and white TV. I heard somebody coming downstairs, one step at a time, as little old ladies tend to do. I was expecting to be told that it was late and that I needed to go to bed. I slept in the guest bedroom downstairs. Grandma and her sister slept upstairs. The only light was the TV. I'd turned off all the lights so as not to make it obvious that I was still up. Even as a kid, I was comfortable in the dark, especially in that house that I only associated with love and goodness. Anyway, I heard the steps coming down and slow steps when it was hitting the landing. The steps continued, taking the next flight that came directly towards me. Still believing it was Grandma or one of my great-aunts, I knew that it depended on who was coming down, whether I would get to finish watching the TV show or not. So I was trying to adjust my eyes to the dark stairway, and I could hear the steps continue to come down. It wasn't until they reached the bottom floor, right in from where I was, that I realized nobody was there. I kept staring that direction and the steps kept coming my way, trying to make sense of what was happening. Once it was clear to me what was happening, I turned off the TV and bolted to my bedroom. Jumped in bed, covered myself with my blankets because all kids know, well, you know, nobody can get you if you cover your head in your blankets. Thankfully, the steps didn't follow me to the bedroom, but I was pretty shaken. For years, I completely blocked it out of my mind. Someday I will share my experience in that house as a teenager and some revelations made to me many years later. Do tell. A week before my grandpa passed away from cancer, I dreamt of my great-grandma, and I begged her not to take him. A few days after he passed away, I heard that he woke up one night saying how he needs to go die. I rarely dreamt of my great-grandma since she passed away in 2012, only twice years ago, and it was very scary. On the other hand, in the beginning of March, I dreamt of her and that my grandpa wasn't sick. At that time, he could barely breathe. Wasn't able to walk well on his own. Looked worn off as cancer really got to him. In that first dream, he was looking healthy. We were talking when I somehow knew that my great-grandma was alive. I went to go get her so she could try this treat, as I know that she never did. I remember hugging her and crying because my grandpa was looking healthy and could speak. That's pretty much all I remember. The second time I dreamt of her was a few days before his lungs collapsed, and the day before we were supposed to all gather. It was a holiday, so we were supposed to spend the day together. I remember my grandpa was sitting in the couch in the living room, smiling at someone, and this time he didn't look healthy. But I also knew how bad he was feeling at that time, and again I knew my great-grandma was here as well. So I go to the other room, and there she is standing, and I go up to her, and I started crying and begging her not to take him. She just looked at me. She didn't say a single word. I don't know if it was that night or the next night that my grandpa woke up and sat in the bed looking from side to side and woke my grandma up to, telling her that he must go, and when she asked him where he said he had to go die. Then looked around for a little bit longer, laid down again, and said, "Not my time yet." Then the next night he told my aunt his mom visited him and told him to drink red and white and that'll cure his cancer. Unfortunately, he passed away a few days after his lungs collapsed. I know that afterlife does exist, and I know that she visited me. And if anybody's interested, you can go to my profile. Read my post about how my grandpa communicated with me through number 2. Whoa. I also have had my other great-grandma come say goodbye to me in my dream after a funeral as my sister and I were out of the country and didn't even know that she had passed away. Sorry about the laughing. I think I might have accidentally temporarily slipped into another dimension. Was it a dream or not? I don't know what happened. I don't know if I dreamed it or if it was even real. I don't want to seem crazy, but I think I, a 17-year-old female, may have jumped into another dimension accidentally, temporarily. For context, my school is one of those schools that keeps students from kindergarten all the way through 9th, 12th grade. Each year, my school takes their students for a one-day-long camping trip to our school's summer camp. From 5th grade to 9th grade, the camp trips last 3 days. From 10th grade to 12th grade, only selected students who complete a specific course can go as camp staff, also known as camp leaders. Camp leaders take care of the camp and the campers. They help out the teachers in camp game logistics. I am a camp leader. I've been to that camp countless times and I know it by heart. See, the camp has two sections named Mission and A Mouse. EMMAUS. Since Mission is the biggest and prettiest section, our school always stays in Mission, never A Mouse. We've never been there officially, except for one night when I was a camper in 6th and 7th grade. I remember the night clearly. We were playing a nocturnal game with our game groups. Game groups could go anywhere in camp except for some exceptions, like the ML section. But for some reason our group ended up lost somewhere in the woods and ended up in the ML section, or what we thought was that. We've never really been there, and we were a bit confused. But oddly, the ML section looked exactly the same as Mission, proportionally and aesthetically. The only thing different was that everything was inverted, almost like a mirror version of Mission or the upside-down version from that show Stranger Things. We thought we were in the Mission section, but we soon realized that we weren't. That was because we came across a cabin named Alabama. None of Mission sector cabins were named Alabama. We didn't think much of this, thinking that this was probably the ML sector. Somehow, we found our way back to Mission sector and continued playing normally, not giving much thought. Years later, as a senior, I went back to the camp on what we call a senior camp program, where all seniors, camp leaders or not, went to camp for at least one last time. One of those days during the camp program, I told my leader, there my friend Kate, about my experience in M House. That's when I was in 6th grade. She got excited and asked me if we could sneak out and see the M House section. So we did. After walking for approximately half an hour, we came across the M House section. It was completely different from what I'd seen in 6th grade. The camp was way smaller, uglier, and cabins were completely different. Needless to say, my friend was disappointed. I sort of was too. Then hours later I spoke to one of our teachers about this, and he said that it was odd because in the whole camp, there's no cabin named Alabama. He said I might have dreamed it. I couldn't accept it. My experience was quite real, and I know it. I even asked one of my friends who was part of my game group during the game, and he said he also remembered that night as clearly as I did. We couldn't have dreamed the same thing, could we? Was it really a dream? What really happened that night? We'll probably never know. Had a run-in while stargazing. To give a complete rundown, I live in Ontario, Canada, close to Toronto. I heard on the news that tonight there'd be a chance to see Northern Lights again. This past May I went and saw them, and I wanted to take the opportunity to see them again. Last May I went with a couple of buddies, but no one was available this time. The plan was to drive 4 hours to Algonquin Park, hike in the middle of the forest, make a campfire, smoke some Marlboros, drive back after stargazing. I end up driving about 2 hours before there, and my friend sends me a text showing me there's no real forecast for the Northern Lights. I decided to go up anyway and stargaze. It's a hobby of mine. I drive up another hour, and at this point it's like 11 p.m. in the middle of nowhere. No signs of humans other than the road and the pitch black. I was on a call with my buddy since it was pretty boring driving up, and I started mentioning how beautiful the stars looked. My buddy then recommended that I pull over and take some pictures to send. I end up pulling over, turning off all the lights of my car while leaving it running. Then I'm standing beside the forest. For about 5 minutes everything was fine as I was admiring the stars gushing to him about, and right about that time the forest went completely quiet. There is literally no sound other than the wind and trees. I immediately felt like something was wrong. I go to grab my flashlight to see if there was a bear or something. Walked a little bit into the woods and turned on my flashlight. I end up hearing a rustling noise and turned around until I see this thing standing on its hind legs. It had a bright orange and red glow to its eyes. It was about 50 meters away. I started mentioning what I'm seeing to my buddy when all of a sudden my signal goes dead before I stare at it for a second. Then it starts sprinting at me. It's full speed. Immediately go into fight or flight, dash to my car, going in and redlining it until I'm doing 300 kilometers an hour. I'm usually a pretty casual guy, not spooked by much, but I was shaking and crying and sobbing and trying to run away as fast as I could. Before anybody says anything, it wasn't to bear anything similar. I started spam calling everybody and anyone. I'd get a hold of my best friend, I started crying and sobbing about what happened while freaking out. And at this point, he just wants to check in and see if I'm okay. I start describing to him what I saw, and I use the name of the subreddit. I don't want to say it even in the text. It was this supernatural-looking thing that had really spooked me. Right around here is where I feel all the muscles in my body start becoming sore and cramping up. Turned out, when I had initially dashed to my car, I basically output all the force I could to get away. I'm an ex-rugby player and powerlifter. Some instincts were forcibly making me get out as fast as possible. After about 30 seconds of saying the name, I see the same figure on the side of the road following me. It has its head and glowing eyes. I proceed to hyperventilate and freak out more until he calms me down and tells me to get the fuck out of there. I started looking for a way to make a U-turn, but I couldn't find anything. At this point, I drive another 15 minutes before I can find somewhere to turn without stopping. I start to slow down, and I do a U-turn before I hear this ear-splitting screaming sound from my window. I start freaking out more, telling my friends everything was happening before I started getting a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something was watching me. I start to look all over the empty roads, and I see nothing. But all of a sudden, my signal goes out again, and I hear the screaming sound. I see a kind of humanoid body in like a fetal position on the side of the road. I then see its head look up and stare at me directly. I gun it again, and I just can't get the goosebumps and sinking feeling to stop. I continue trying to contact everybody I can to no avail. I end up trying to calm myself down with my Kanye CD and hear something tapping my sunroof. I don't think that CD will help. I don't know how I knew, but I knew something wanted me to open the sunroof cover and look through. I prevailed. Never looked, but never lost that sinking feeling that it was there. I would hear the tapping sound on and off, kind of rhythmically, kind of like drums. Be for about an hour until I reached a small town. At this point, I've gotten a hold of my friend and puked in my car. I'm just trying to get back as fast as possible, and he's telling me to describe Elden Ring lore to him to calm me down. After about an hour of paranoia, I stop crying and freaking out. I drive as fast as possible to get home, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still on me. I've locked all my doors and windows, and I'm still shaking like crazy. I don't know what to do, and I'm freaking out. One of my many strange childhood experiences that I would love insight on. Am I just making this a bigger deal than it is? Let me start off by saying that this is not the only strange or unexplained event that I've experienced. I'm currently 26 and I've had bizarre encounters my whole life. This particular experience happened when I was around 7 years old. Me, my mom, dad, and brother, 1-year-old baby at the time, and my grandparents all rented a room at Colorado ski resort. It was a pretty sweet resort. My family's unit consisted of a living area, kitchen, and 3 bedrooms that were connected by a hallway. My parents and grandparents had their room, and my brother and I were sharing a room. This was the first and last time that I went to Colorado for skiing. Not because of this experience, but because it wasn't in the cards again for us. We were booked to stay for a week, flying out on the 7th day in the afternoon. Couldn't have been more excited. I remember having an absolute blast trying to learn how to maneuver the slopes, even though I kind of sucked at it and had 2 speeds, too fast or laying in the snow. It was because I lost control and crashed. It wasn't until the 3rd day of our trip that I started seeing a shadow figure out of the corner of my eye. I remember the first time I saw it. I was coloring on the coffee table in the living area, and all my hair stood on end. I wasn't sure why, but then I noticed the figure out of my peripheral. It was tall, seemed to be shaped like a man, all black, appeared to be wearing a cowboy hat, but with less of a rim, almost like a fedora or bowler cap, I guess. I saw it walking down the same hall leading to the room, or peeking out from behind a wall, and, well, the weird thing is, every time I looked directly at the area that it would just disappear. I began to feel a sense of dread, something that wasn't foreign to me. I've dealt with a slew of issues and challenges. At this time, my OCD was terrible, and I was later professionally diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. The reason I bring this up is because of anxiety, panic, and overstimulation were not a foreign experience to me, so it wasn't like a child's first experience with anxiety sort of situation. The feeling I got when I saw this figure was different. I remember I actually was so scared at one point I brought it up to my mom, who said that apparently, she too sees figures in her peripheral vision. That was much worse when she was a kid, but that all people experience this phenomenon. She said it was my imagination or in my mind. Maybe he was playing tricks on me and it wasn't real. I trusted her, but still had a horrible feeling in my gut. Fast forward to day 5 or 7 of her trip. I became violently ill. Vomiting, fever, fatigue. The whole shebang. I distinctly remember the throwing up and sweating from the fever being particularly bad. I rested the last full day, which was day 6, while my family members took turns monitoring me. I honestly don't remember any of it. From what they told me, I was either asleep, vomiting, or in a strange, semi-lucid state that they said was a result of the fever. Then came day 7. We were leaving in the afternoon, and I have memories of that day. One that stands out, me running to the bathroom and vomiting in the tub. I did my best, to get rest and to get ready for the flight home, but I truly felt like I was dying. I even said maybe we could stay until I felt better because the thought of flying was so aversive. But that wasn't an option. We flew home, and shockingly I never once threw up on the flight. Got back in the early morning hours, and I went to sleep and woke up in our home the next morning feeling significantly better. My family said that it was altitude sickness or a 48-hour bug. And if it was altitude sickness, why did it only hit me on the 5th day? I could see it being a bug or maybe the flu, but I still have had that gut feeling that something more was at play. Nothing of it really made sense to me, even as a child, but I brushed it off and I moved on. It wasn't until I began learning about the unexplained that I started to question if maybe these events were connected. What if the figure I kept seeing that made me feel scared enough to tell my mom, which wasn't something I normally did, had something to do with it? I don't have the answers, but I figured maybe some people in this sub might have a unique insight or perspective that I haven't thought of before. Sleep paralysis, attempted sexual assault spirit. This was about 8 years ago. Around this time, I was heavily in my drinking. 1 year sober now. Congrats. My ex at the time had just kicked me out due to my drinking. My mom and older brother had recently moved into a new place. After being kicked out, I landed back on their couch. Having been kicked out and distraught as a result of my actions, my ex left me and I started drinking even more. Every day I was drinking and going to sleep drunk or at least buzzed. During this time, I was also having sleep paralysis every night without fail, 2 times in a row before I'd be able to fully fall asleep. It was routine, and I had accepted it. I would fall asleep, have sleep paralysis, force myself to wake up and say, okay, 1 more time to go. Go back to sleep, then I'd have sleep paralysis again, force myself to wake up again, and then, finally I'd be able to sleep. This went on for like 2 or 3 months at least. So this particular night was just like every other night, except it wasn't. I had just finished a 3-pack of Modelo tall cans. At least that's what I remember. I know I for sure had more than just those 3 tall boys. I went to sleep, and like every other night, except it wasn't, I remind you. I awoke into sleep paralysis. I was still buzzed, even in sleep paralysis mode. What I'm going to describe next happened in a matter of maybe 6 seconds or less. But it might sound longer as I'm going to describe what transpired in detail. I could never and will never forget this. So I wake up and I can't move. I'm sleeping face down. That's when I feel something and I freeze. I'm already frozen, but it's more like I'm still. Like not attempting to wake myself up. It's like when you hear a noise at home and you lower the TV to make sure you're not making it up to confirm. And I am trying to assess if what I felt was real. I'm still in sleep paralysis. Then I feel it again, the second time, and this time in full aware mode. Now I'm processing what I felt and everything is in slow motion. I feel it again. Then that third time in my head, I'm like, fuck that. I bolt right up and usually take me like 6 or 7 pushes to wake myself up, but this time when it happened, I jolted right up. First go, first attempt. I turned over and sat up and there was nothing on me. I was in shock and super scared. So scared that I started telling myself that it was a dream and that it was fake to calm myself down. But it was just so intense, it just happened that part of me just knew I was lying to myself. I said, hell no, fuck that, I'm going back to sleepy time. Or, excuse me, I'm not going back to sleep, I'm a stay up until I have to go to work. Opposite of sleepy time, some would say. It was 3 or 4 a.m. I had to be up at 6 a.m. and I had just sat up and I was going to wait until 6, but then this heavy rush of sleepiness took over. Couldn't for the life of me resist falling back asleep. Maybe I was fighting it so hard that it tired me. I ended up falling asleep, and when I woke up this time to get ready for work, it was a lot easier. Easier for me to convince myself that it wasn't real. But even still, a smaller part of me knew that I was just lying to myself for comfort. And over time, I put that experience in the back of my head. Tried to forget it. As time passed, and when I would get drunk and people brought up the subject of the paranormal, I would share my experience. Over time, it became easier to share the story without shame. Slowly started coming to terms with accepting what had happened. To this day, I don't sleep on my stomach anymore. I don't know if anybody would after something like that. I did have to continue sleeping on that couch, but nothing of sorts really happened to me since. What I'd felt was something entering my butt, and I'm a guy. Seems like either gender would be unpleasant. Very slowly. There is no full penetration, which is why I refer to it as SA rather than the R word. Close enough. A couple of months ago, I shared the story with somebody as they mentioned it maybe being a possible possession attempt, and it was trying to desecrate me. It blew my mind. Hadn't heard of that one before. I don't know, I guess I'll never know. That is mildly scary. To me. And it should be to you. Unexplained haunting, mass hallucinations, or otherwise, I disappeared. It began in high school as far as I understand it. Walking outside in senior year listening to my iPod in 2010. I was alone in the parking lot during lunch. That's when some sheet of darkness spreads through my body. My vision doesn't just go dark, it's like a curtain was drawn across my eyes gradually. With it, a coldness washed over and through me. As if something I couldn't see had stepped through me. I could feel and breathe and continue to walk, so I stopped confused. I couldn't hear anything for that moment. Well, my music had stopped. Then it passed, the curtain lifted, and warmth returned. I could hear the wind. My iPod had shut off. How? I was already somewhat of a believer of ghosts, but I was admittedly worried. Was that a real experience, and did I turn off my iPod? I had no idea. But I couldn't just ask someone. They'd think I was making something up, or else, well, nobody would explain it. But that wasn't the end of things, because I think I accidentally brought it home with me. Every night after, for the next year, I'd see something shimmer in the mirror, moving around in my hallway. I'd look directly at it and watch it move. In the otherwise steaming shower, I'd feel a sharp nail as cold as ice trail upward across my back as if it was teasing me. I'd stare at the wall and see solid black shadows swipe at my lights and turn them off. That's while I'm just sitting in the room. No footsteps, no creaking. Only the flip of a switch as if they simply lived there. My family, you must understand, sleeps with their doors closed. I stay up and noise travels very easily in our house. But I'd never hear its footsteps. Over time, whatever it was would, become. Gradually gained color and form, till I could see its entire shape in the dark. A tall white woman with arms that were stretched to drag across the ground, flowing white loose skin and long white hair, as if it was all just following gravity, but otherwise could have been amorphous. It only took a humanesque shape here for some reason, but it wasn't a person. It was as if it was pretending to look like one. One night, my closest friend at the time stayed for a few months after being evicted from their home. At the breakfast table, I started asking if they'd seen anything odd. They described it in perfect detail. That white wiggly thing, they called it. There's nothing we could do about it. What could we have done? But it didn't stop. It got worse. One night, not sleeping in my room, and, having fallen asleep with the closet light on, so maybe shielding myself from whatever it was, I awoke to a shadow on the wall. I was facing the opposite wall from my closet light, and it was long and standing up. I blinked, and I felt my arm, above me. I felt oddly weightless. It was my shadow. I was hanging from the ceiling. And please believe me, whatever it was pulling me into the ceiling by my arm. I yanked it back and fell and slammed into my bed and nearly hit my head in my lamp. I didn't understand how something that defies all logic and explanation was becoming more and more real with time. Where did it come from? Why does it want me? Did it only start perceiving me by bumping into me in that parking lot? But it stopped when I left for university. Or so I thought. A few years into my university education in another city, living out of my house, I was walking to a friend's apartment as the sun set. It was a rental in some light woodland just off the street in a park. There were trees and single-bedroom houses down there. I just left a few minutes after my roommate had gone. See, I had wanted to finish an essay before heading out, but changed my mind shortly after. But when I got to that wooded area with so little light from the street with the sun setting, I saw in perfect detail that it was following me. It finally found me again. It was standing right there behind a tree. That white wiggly thing had taken the full shape of a woman. It screamed into my mind an inhuman static sound, like a half-connected audio jack, and I blacked out. When I came to, the night was dark and I was lying on the ground in the parking lot right in front of the apartments where my roommate had gone. I couldn't form thoughts in my head. It was as if it was blank, left only with an impulse to run. So I ran straight forward, toward the little house I was meant to reach, just 100 feet from where I'd been laying. My friends were there asking where I'd been. They went out to look for me, couldn't find me because I'd been missing for 3 hours. I just vanished, and so did it. Because I just, up and disappeared after that. Never seen it since, and even after visiting back with my parents, it's like whatever that was is free now. somewhere out there looking like that, like an almost person, having taken something from me. And for some reason, that reminded me of Donnie Darko waking up in the golf course. Update. I just woke up. It's 3:52 a.m. I just had a nightmare. A nightmare about a little boy. Thing is that I was in a room filled with people at work. That's how it first started. The elevator had 15 floors. There's a party going on, so I went. To my surprise, I was only going to the 3rd floor, but I ended up going all the way to the 15th. Since I'm highly afraid of heights, I tried to go back to the elevator, but it was still taking a long time. That's when I saw a woman trying to invite me over, and I said, no thank you. Long story short, that party slowly dies down and everything goes dark. And I eventually made it back to the elevator. There's a bellboy who I asked to take me down to the 3rd floor. He said, of course. He pressed the button, took me down, and I eventually got there. Then the dream changed. I was at home, but there were 2 kids there. A girl who looked about 12 or 13. She wore a pink pajama set, pink long shirt, pink pants. Then the little boy. The room was built way different than mine. It had a hammock built on the inside and 2 separate beds altogether. The little girl commented to me about this little boy. I asked what's wrong with him. She told me he keeps going to the basement to talk to this old man. So my guess is, okay, he's pretending. I told her, don't worry about it, he's probably just pretending. I'll keep an eye on him. The little girl said okay. At this point, I felt like the mother or something. And keep in mind that I don't have kids and never have been married. So anyway, this little boy is like an orange pajama set. So, when I woke up in that dream, I heard him like a very loud man yelling. I woke up and that little boy was dead-eyed staring at me from the doorway. He was no longer in bed and it startled me. He was smiling and his hair was short and he had brown hair. After staring me down, I gathered my thoughts. I followed him down to the basement. The sister looked terrified, so I told her to stay put. The sister sat up in bed and watched me go get this little boy and get it over with. So I follow him down into the basement, and soon everything changes again. I keep hearing this old man talk to this little boy. So I peeked at what was going on, and this little boy was screaming as if he was talking in an old man's voice. He said things like, "Quit it!" So I just casually went over and took the little boy by the hand. Then he looked at me. I asked him, "Are you okay?" "We should go back upstairs," he told me. "No." Like loud. Had me concerned. I have to pause here and just heard a plate in my kitchen. Anyway, the dream changes again, but this time I'm in my own room, but this little boy is still with me. He's no longer talking in this little boy's voice. He was growling and trying to talk to me. I looked at him, and next thing I know, he comes up to me, jumps on my bed as I'm laying down, and crawls up over me. This time he's laying down beside me next to the wall. I don't know exactly what he was saying because I asked him what was going on and what was happening. Eventually he just kept talking to his, in his hoarse voice. I don't know what to make of it, but I can't sleep. I decided to do an update and write about it. I don't know if it has anything to do with what I said earlier, or if it's something completely different. Need suggestion on haunted family baby doll. So in high school, I met a girl whom we're going to call Emily. She came from a very abusive home, and I call her my big sister basically to this day. Emily's mother was into drugs, and at 3, because of the situation, she went to live with her great-grandmother. Not long after her younger sister was born, she was given to the great-grandmother at only a few days old. The great-grandmother would take both girls to the garage sales and such, so all Emily's toys were mainly second-hand. At one of these garage sales was a baby doll named Jenny. Jenny is one of those dolls that, when held up, the eyes were open. When laid down, the eyes would shut. When squeezed, she would say like a few sayings that she would say. The two most common sayings were, "I love you, Mommy," and "Mommy, please, let's play house." Jenny was cute and all until after they got her home. She would go off when no one was around, mainly with those two catchphrases. Years went by and the batteries on this doll were never changed. Weird things happened around the doll. Most of the time, a lot of the antics of the doll was just blamed on the fact the house that they lived in was very old. It was never anything nasty, like things falling off shelves or anything. The worst was lights turning off and on, as she would say that this would sort of coincide with the catchphrases. Sometimes she would go off while you walked past her. The air sometimes around her was thicker or colder. However, as they spoke with neighbors of the person who sold them the doll, we found out a very interesting bit of information regarding Jenny. As the neighbors told us, Jenny belonged to a little girl who went missing in the 60s or 70s. Her parents never gave up on the thought that she would have one day come home. However, as the case grew colder and colder, they were sure that if they ever found her alive, she'd be an adult, but that most likely she had passed away. Apparently, the little girl had carried this doll everywhere that she had went. The father of the little girl had passed away in the 90s. The mother of the little girl decided to go through a lot of the things in her home. Though she didn't sell all of the little girl's things, we were told that she no longer left the room, as if the little girl would one day come back and would perhaps want her toys to go to the children. So that way they'd be able to play with them, that they loved them so much as, her own daughter had been able to. Emily's great-grandmother passed away when she was 16. She moved in with her grandmother and brought Jenny with her. Emily and Jenny are still to this day very closely connected. This was around the time that I met Emily, and Emily came to live with my family about a year after her great-grandmother's passing. That was because her home life with her grandmother was not very safe. Emily and her younger sister grew very close to her family. That's because of the abuse, and we adopted both the girls. So today, Emily and her younger sister, they're my older and younger siblings. When she moved in, this was about the time that I met Jenny. We'd been living in a apartment with its very own unique quirks at the time. We didn't really think anything horrible when it came to Jenny. We thought that Jenny was just a very quirky doll. I even played a trick on Emily at one point that Jenny obviously was in on. I'd strung Jenny up in the closet by her neck and taped a cheese knife in one hand. Emily opened the door to the doll in the closet holding a cheese knife, saying almost on cue, "Mommy, please, let's play house." And we all laughed. Both Emily and I have had dreams with the little girl over the years. However, after hearing "Mommy, please, let's play house" about 1,000 times, enough was enough. I said out loud, "Sorry, Jenny, but I need a break from your saying." I then opened the Velcro on her back, exposing her voice box, and screwed it, and found out that she had no batteries. At that exact moment, she said, "I love you, Mommy." I looked over at Emily and I told her, "You have got to be shitting me." For close to 10 years, she'd been running without any batteries whatsoever. I closed her voice box up and set her back on her shelf. We never tried to mess with her voice box again. About 10 years ago, maybe longer, Jenny ended up in my home. I've tried to get Emily to take her back, but she doesn't know if she wants to. Her husband, Jeff, who's a fake name, didn't seem to be interested in taking the doll into their home. A few years ago, I was downsizing a lot to my younger sister, and I talked about maybe donating Jenny. It seemed like we were just pushing her into another family, but at that point we didn't know what to do. We loaded everything up to the car and drove to the donation bin, dumped a large pile of clothes and the other household items into the bin. Both my younger sister and I could have sworn we placed Jenny into the donation bin. The storage box, I swear, was empty when we placed it in the car and then unloaded it, empty onto the porch. Not once since we donated Jenny did we ever hear her voice box say any of her iconic lines. Over the last couple of years, the box has been weathered, cracked at the top, and oil spilled into the inside. I didn't think anything of it because, well, it's empty, right? Well, Emily and I were getting ready for Halloween earlier this week. We rearranged the porch. We'd been talking about Jenny only a few minutes prior with fond memories and saying how much we missed her, not knowing what was in the storage container. So I opened it only to find Jenny at the bottom of the container covered in a black layer of grease. We had thought that she was living her best life only to find out this whole time she was actually at the bottom of this container. We felt really bad. So Emily and I talked and we agreed that I would try to clean Jenny up as best as I could before getting her to move on. Her voice box was completely removed. Jenny was put into a Zote soap bath a few times. That sounds exotic. Then put in a bleach bath at the end. Less exotic. The wonders those two things alone did was very interesting. She seriously looks like new now. Once she was clean, I sat down with her and I burned some sage. Had a conversation with her that it was okay to move on. That we all loved her, but she needed to move on to something better. That she didn't need to stay. I did use salt and holy water on the doll and the voice box. After chatting with her for a little while, it seemed like the air was more clear, less stale. The doll always seemed full of life, and now it feels as if the light had gone out. I hung Jenny up to dry, and that was that. Her voice box went into the trash. Yesterday, I FaceTimed Emily, and upon seeing Jenny, she was amazing. She looked beautiful, almost at peace even. We chatted with her little sister, and now we have a new dilemma. We don't know if we have the heart to donate Jenny. We don't think Jenny wanted the doll to leave her family. From the videos of what we've seen people do to these dolls, we know that there's a chance that she might not be shown the respect that she might deserve. I know the spirit of the little girl is no longer in the doll, but at this point it almost goes on the level of desecrating a body in our eyes. Our younger sister has a new baby who could play with Jenny, but she's skeptical on allowing her daughter to play with Jenny when she gets older. Either Emily or I will keep Jenny, apparently. Emily was even considering we hold a funeral for Jenny, put her in a shoebox with flowers and bury her in the backyard. The thing is we do have neighbors who might think that we're burying an actual body. Yes, they are that nosy, and the energy it might take to clear up such a misunderstanding isn't worth it. Emily considered which one of us two had Emily considered whichever one of us two has kids first to keep Jenny. Though until apparently she would stay with me. At this point, I'm at a loss for what to do with Jenny. Anybody have any idea on what I can do? At this point, it looks like Jenny might permanently become my doll. We don't really want to disrespect her. We're happy for her, but at the same time, we're sad that her spirit's gone, if that makes sense. We know Jenny would love for another child to play with her in the future, but we're still unsure of what to do. Any suggestions on what we could do would be greatly appreciated. I will never be able to hear the name Jenny without thinking about Forrest Gump. And with that glitch, see ya. Welcome to Paranormal M, where mystery is always in the air. Subscribe and hit notifications to never miss our latest spine-chilling episodes. Brace yourself for the unexpected. This is not just a story. I face the spiritual world, and it's real. I don't even know how to start this. I need you to know, though, that every word you're about to read is real. This isn't me trying to convince you or make you believe in something. This is me saying the spiritual world exists. Possession exists. I lived through it. I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it. I have to tell you everything because I think people need to know. It's late at night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd been sitting outside this guy's house for hours, just waiting. This wasn't the first time I'd done this. I had been going back to that house day after day, week after week, month after month. And every single time, they'd lie to my face. They'd tell me like my little cousin wasn't there, telling me that she wasn't inside. But I knew better. You know that feeling in your gut like something's pulling at you, like you can't explain, but you know deep down? That's what this was. I knew that she was in there. I could feel it. So I parked across the street, sat in my car and just watched. Hours went by, me just sitting there, staring at the house, thinking maybe tonight would be different. And then finally I saw it. The car pulled up, someone got out, walked up to the door and knocked. I watched as they let this person in, and right then I knew. This was it. I slipped out of my car, moved across the street, stood just out of sight, right next to the door. My heart was pounding. I knew they were going to let that person back out, and when they did, I'd be ready. A few minutes later, the door opens again. I see them start to let that person out, and I move in. I don't even think about it. But then they see me. They try to slam the door shut. I was done with their lies, done with being shut out again. I kicked that door with everything I had, and it flew open. The person leaving looked at me. They were shocked, like, what the? I didn't even hesitate. I looked them straight in the eyes, calm as I could, and I said, "Mind your business." They took one look at me, didn't say another word, and disappeared into the night. Then it was just me and that open door. I stepped inside. The second I crossed that threshold, I felt it. I don't even know how to explain it right, but it was like the air changed. It was thick and heavy, like something dark and sticky was hanging in it, pressing down on my skin even. This wasn't just a bad feeling, it was worse than that, like a force. It was like something evil had soaked into the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. I could feel it right down in my bones. To my right, there was another door. I don't care about the old man or her boyfriend, or who else might have been in that room. I wasn't there for them. I asked, "What's behind that door?" He tried to tell me that it was just the bathroom, like he thought I'd believe that. I knew better. I could feel her just beyond that door, like a presence pulling me in. So I opened it. There it was, a long hallway with another door at the end. But before that door, there was a curtain. I don't know why, but the second I reached out to touch it, something inside me told me to look away. It was like I couldn't even bring myself to face it, like something dark was hiding behind it, just waiting. But I didn't come this far to turn back now. I yanked the curtain aside, and there she was, my little cousin. But she wasn't herself. Standing there, skin as pale as a ghost, you have to understand. She's had the most beautiful caramel skin. But right then, she looked like every ounce of life had been drained out of her. Then she looked at me, like she didn't even know who I was, and said, "Who are you?" That shook me. I was angry. But more than that, I was scared. Thought maybe she was messing with me, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I kept my voice steady, tried to keep calm. "Don't mess with me. I've been looking everywhere for you." But even then, I knew that she wasn't herself. It was like she wasn't even there, like something else had taken her place. Didn't want to leave. I couldn't force her, not yet. So I told her I'd be back tomorrow. The next day I showed up with food. She was still paranoid and not really wanting to leave. I didn't understand it. Why wouldn't she just come with me? It didn't make sense. But I kept coming back day after day, and each time she looked worse, more drained. Like something was eating away at her from the inside. And then one day, she looked at me and said, "The spirits in the mirrors are messing with me." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She told me her boyfriend's dad had been feeding her lies, telling her not to go to work because the world was evil, that everyone was evil, and that spirits were following her. I was furious. It didn't make sense to me how she had gotten to this point. How had she gotten so paranoid? I walked out of the closet where she was staying. I went to sit next to the old man in the kitchen. I was boiling. "Whatever you've been telling my little cousin, you need to tell her that you were lying," I said. "Because now she's all messed up and she won't even leave." He just sat there calm, and I wanted to smack him. "I should mess you up for this," I told him. Then he had the nerve to say, "I'm not lying. There are spirits, and they are following her. They follow everyone. We all have two things following us." I lost it. I hit him. I didn't even care at that point. It wasn't just about what he'd said. It was the fact that he had messed with my cousin's head. She was only 16. She was vulnerable. He had filled her head with all these lies. I grabbed her by my hand and "I care if you're afraid," I said. "You're leaving with me now." She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. But I wasn't about to let her stay there another second. We walked straight out of that house, out of that ugly, messed up place. We walked down the street a few blocks until we reached my stepdad's house. He always kept the garage about halfway open, so that's where we went. We walked through the churchyard, through the parking lot, then crossed the alley. Right there was the door to my stepdad's garage. He walked inside. Inside, it was full of his stuff and old car emblems and rear-view mirrors and big mirrors everywhere. It was his hangout, and normally we weren't even allowed in there. But at that point, I didn't care. I wanted to keep her safe. We sat on the couch for a minute, and that's when she said, "Do you see that?" I looked around, and there it was. A beautiful light. It wasn't an orb or anything like that. It was like a beam of light floating. Like a flashlight, but more peaceful than that. It was moving around the room, across the mirrors, across the wall, just floating. But it wasn't random. I could feel that it was good. "What the heck?" I said. Then it was gone. Just disappeared. I got up to grab some water, stepping to the main house just for a moment. When I came back, she was sitting up on the back of the couch. You know the way people sit with their feet on the cushions, bouncing on the top edge like they're watching for something. She was looking around, her eyes darting like she was searching for something just beyond the room. Something only she could see. Then it hit me. There was this feeling deep down, like a voice whispering inside of me telling me, "You have to tell it to leave you alone." I didn't even think about it. It just came out. "You have to tell it to leave you alone," I said. At first, she didn't say anything, didn't even whisper. She just mouthed the words soundless, like she was too afraid to let them out. "I can't," she mouthed. I could see her lips moving, but no sound came. "You have to tell it," I said. "You have to tell it now. And you have to mean it. Only you can make it leave." And that's when it happened. She took a deep breath, and then with everything she had, she screamed, "Leave me alone." It was so loud that it echoed in the room. For a second, it felt like the whole world stopped. And then in that instant, she collapsed, slowly like a tower falling piece by piece. She didn't just drop, she crumbled to the floor, as if every ounce of energy had drained out of her. I rushed over, picked her up, and that's when I saw it. Her skin. That pale, ghostly color started to fade away. And as I held her, I watched as her beautiful caramel skin began to return. It was like something dark and heavy had been drained from her, and now life was coming back. I didn't see the entity leave her, but I felt it right there in the air, like a weight lifting, something releasing her. I looked at her, I held her close and said, "We've got to go." Didn't know why I said it. I just knew that we couldn't stay in that room any longer. I didn't know where we had to go, but I knew that we had to leave. We walked out of the man cave, through the garage, and I didn't even take 2 steps out of the door before I saw them. 3 of them. These massive, towering beings, like nothing I'd ever seen. I don't know if angels is the right word, because it didn't look like what you see in pictures or what people talk about with wings and robes. These were guardians and warriors. They were like there to protect us, and I knew it. I could feel it down to my core. Their skin looked golden, shimmering with a translucent glow, like light was woven into it. They didn't look like anything from this world. They were beautiful and strong and powerful without being frightening. Their muscles were like the embodiment of strength itself. Smooth, firm, not bulging or veiny, but solid, like they were made of pure energy. They were dressed in white rompers, like a tank top and shorts, but they were outlined in gold. They stood so tall. Their heads were in the clouds. I couldn't even see their faces, but I didn't need to. Just seeing them was enough. They were protectors, and they were there for us. Standing there right in the middle of them, I felt as small as an ant. Our heads barely reached the level of their sandals. That's how huge they were. They stood in a circle facing one another, with us right in the center, like they were creating this shield around us. I've never felt anything so beautiful in my life. I didn't want it to end. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, held in this powerful, peaceful presence. But we couldn't stay. I knew it, and so did she. I don't know how long we stood there, surrounded by those beings. Time felt like it didn't even exist anymore. All I could feel was this deep calm, this strength, this absolute certainty that we were safe and protected. I knew they were there for us, standing watch, creating this shield of light and strength around us. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. I looked over at her and she looked back at me. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. And in that quiet, in the middle of all of that power, we just looked at each other and then looked back up at them. There was this shared understanding, like we both knew that we'd seen something far beyond anything that we could have imagined. We smiled, not even needing to speak, just feeling that silent connection between us. Together we look up toward the sky. They were so tall, their heads were in the clouds stretching up into the heavens, yet their feet were still firmly planted in the ground. They were here, in this world, yet part of something so much larger. It was like they bridged the space between the earth and the sky, rooted yet reaching toward something divine. They were there for us. I've never felt anything like it, and in that moment I wanted to stay. I don't remember exactly when those towering guardians disappeared. One minute they were around us, their presence strong and powerful. The next, they were just gone. But the feeling of their protection stayed with us. I looked at her, took her hand, and said, "We got to go." We walked out through the regular garage door. leaving the old car and the quiet presence of the guardians behind. Stepping out into the front part of the house, we made our way inside, crossing through another door that led into my stepdad's house, heading straight to his bedroom. When we got there, she sat down on the bed, her head hanging low and drained. I left the room briefly, maybe to get a drink of water or to go to the restroom. Can't remember. But when I came back, I noticed something immediately. She had covered every mirror in the room. The wall had been filled with mirrors, covering every corner, even the headboard of the bed, but now each one was hidden, covered with towels. I felt this strange calm settle over the space, almost like a layer of protection. Like she had instinctively known the mirrors needed to be blocked. I walked over and sat next to her in the bed, feeling that pull to say something, to pray, to ask for protection. But when I opened my mouth, nothing would come out. My voice felt locked, like something was holding me back and pressing down on my throat. I looked at her and without thinking I asked, "Are you okay?"